Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give it just a couple seconds while everybody gets logged in and their audio connected, and then we'll get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's CLE program sponsored by the Government Lawyer section of the Florida Bar. This course is titled Florida Legislative Update in 2025 Preview. Course number is 8815. To submit questions to our speaker, please utilize the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. Time permitting, she will address these questions at the conclusion of the program. Before I turn it over to our speaker, I wanted to remind everybody that the winter meeting schedule is posted to the bar's website. If you're planning to attend and stay overnight, make sure to make your hotel reservations by December 31st to secure the group rate. Our next section, CLE, is scheduled for January 30th. That's a Mindfulness for Lawyers CLE put together by the Health and Wellness Committee. You can find more information on that and the link to register on the section's website. The section's currently slated to have one CLE per month, so be on the lookout for more information on future programming. Today's speaker is Maria McCorkle. She is the chair-elect for the Government Lawyer section. She is a career-long government attorney and a self-proclaimed part-time animal wrangler. Maria, thank you for putting this course together, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Yes, I ended up with 3 dogs, 3 cats, and a bunny in my house, so I'm slowly becoming the 12 days of Christmas over here, but not by choice. So we are here today to talk about the legislature and to talk about what's going on with politics in Florida and how it affects us as legal professionals in terms of like the statutes you need to be paying attention to, things to be looking out for if you're a homeowner, homeowners insurance, all that stuff that makes adulting and being a lawyer fun. So just if you keep seeing ears, it's because I was trying to be festive, but my filter's not letting it. I have antlers on. I'm just not wearing deer ears because as the memes going around, it's like it's a week till all the holiday festivities, 2 weeks to the new year. We're just in our holiday era right now. So let's get started. First of all, this is going to be where we are today in terms of our roadmap. We're going to talk about session 101, some things that have changed between the last speaker, which would be Speaker Renner, that was 2022 to 2024, to the current speaker now, which will be Speaker Perez as of last month. We'll do a quick legislative overview. I'm not going to talk about legislative intent and research, but if you're interested in that CLE, feel free to let me know. We'll talk about the notable bills from session 2024, the constitutional amendments, and how that may impact session 2025, and then we'll finish with session 2025. I also want to take this opportunity to say this is an outstanding use of your lunch. Thank you so much for your support of the Government Lawyers section. We are dedicated to supporting our government lawyers. If you want to get involved, contact us because we'd love to hang out and support government lawyers. We have a good time doing it. So this is the important caveat. This is an apolitical CLE, meaning I have no opinion about anything. If you have a question of why something was done, if you have a question where you feel strongly about an issue, if you go to either myfloridahouse.gov or flsenate.gov, you'll be able to find who your elected official is for for where you live. And I would strongly encourage you to contact them. When I was a legislative aide, just by a bit of background, I worked in the legislature prior to going to law school. I worked in the Senate and the House. And we always loved hearing from constituents, good or bad. We wanted to hear from constituents. So the content that's from here is going to be from public/government information websites. I have the citations available if you'd like them. There are 1 or 2 where I do have an update from a news source because a vote was taken and the government website hasn't been updated yet. Go Gators, as you can tell by my excellent graph. That's about the extent of the math that you'll see in here is that graph. But if you do have any questions or concerns about legislation or whatever, please talk to your local elected officials about it. This is literally just supposed to be strictly apolitical. So let's get to the legislative process, Maria's version. So this is what we're at right now with the state government. We have a state government trifecta. We've had one for the last several years. What that means is that three parties the same party controls the upper chamber, the lower chamber, unless you're in Nebraska, they're unicameral, and the governor's office. So Florida is now one of 23 trifectas. There are 17 Democrat trifectas. So if you're looking at the whole country, we are one of 23 trifectas, and then there are 17 democratically controlled legislatures and gubernatorial houses for it. And Nebraska is unicameral. So, there's your trivia for the day. I think if I remember it correctly, it's Nebraska. Don't quote me on it. So what do they do? So we have these 60-day sessions every year. We've been having them since we became a state. What is the purpose of it? Is it to pass bills? What is it? No, it's a constitutional requirement, is to pass a balanced budget. That is it. And it's actually based on an impari materia reading of different sections. And I know I'm not using that Latin correctly, but it made me feel fancy today. So what we have is we have the provision of the Florida Constitution basically says what comes in is what you can use to pay out. And then we also have the statute. So we have these two very clear provisions. There's nothing explicitly that says that this is what you have to do, but it's the idea that it shall be made annually to pay with provision. So that's been basically interpreted to me. Look, the legislature, if it showed up on March 4th, passed a budget and sine died, it would not be that would not be a violation of the legislature's obligation to the people of Florida for it. And I've always found that to be fascinating. So let's talk about the most recent session 126 of the Florida legislature. But first, let's do the numbers. And if you are familiar with Kai Risdall, I have a love-hate relationship with his voice, because I love it so much that I hate that I have it in my head whenever somebody wants to talk about the numbers. I hear that. But first, look, I just don't have the jazz music to go along with it if you listen to Marketplace. So we had 20 claim bills filed. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with claim bills are a really fascinating evolution of sovereign immunity, exceptions to sovereign immunity claims. And essentially when an agency is found liable and it's above that agency's insurance limits, for example, they can petition the legislature to basically make an appropriation concerning that claim. But when those claim bills are filed, and there's many of them, they're filed every session. They're usually the first bills that are filed. They're going to be, you'll see relief of X, Y, and Z. They'll name the agency or entity that was responsible for the harm that was found. It gets referred to as Special Masters Committee. And that's a whole fascinating area. So if you ever want to talk about claim bills and the sovereign immunity exception, let me know. Fun fact, the first claim bill was actually from somebody getting injured while working on the construction of Florida's original Capitol building. He fell through a porch, the wood fell through it. So more trivia for you. Joint resolutions filed, the general bills, total bills. So we're looking at 1902 total bills filed, but the total enrolled, meaning that they passed both houses in the same format, and they're going to go to the governor 325. So I don't know the math on that in terms of a percentage, but what I like to say is may the odds be ever in your favor when it comes to filing bills, because as you can see, a lot of bills get filed, but not many make it to being order enrolled. So if you're not familiar with it, this is how this is a bill that sits on Capitol Hill, or this is a bill that sits on Appalachian Parkway, but the Hill thing does sound better. But this is how it goes. And as you can see, it really does go through a lot. And one of the areas I want to point out is bill drafting, because that's going to come into play when we talk about what's coming up for the session, because bill drafting is so incredibly important, and their deadlines. There are very prescribed deadlines for making sure your bills are in, so that way they appropriate, get a number. In the House, there's only 6 they can file. I believe still 6 bills that they are allowed to file, whereas in the Senate, they're allowed to file any number of bills that they can put in there for it. And so that's one of the areas where you submit it to bill drafting, they give it back to you, and now you have that number, and now you can start tracking it, and now you can see it progress through everything, including the reading. So if it's in the journal, if it's on the special order calendar, and then you get the 60 days. So what you see is at the bottom, this is also important, is the effective date. So it's 60 days, if somebody dies, specify date. So you'll often hear oh, we're getting a bunch of new laws on January 1st. There's a specified date for it, or upon the governor's signature, which is also known as effective upon becoming law. So these are the governor's actions. So all the bills are presented. There were 16 vetoes. As you can see, I last checked this. My screenshots from August, I forgot to update it, but yes, we've had, those are the vetoes for it. And also as a reminder, we have a line item veto in the state of Florida. Even though if we remember from con law, The line item veto was not allowed for the president back when we were talking about con law back in 1L year. So yes, Florida does have the line item veto, and the governor, whoever is in the governor's office, there will be a list of what's been stricken in terms of the appropriations, and then you'll often hear about them in the news in terms of, okay, this was vetoed for X, Y, and Z or whatever for it. But it will be made available, the governor's website, at actually next month, probably in the next couple of weeks for sure. What will be done is that it will be the presentation of the governor's proposed budget for the legislature to consider. There's a website. If you go to the governor's website, and then you can go to the specific proposed budget for that year, and you'll see what looks like this format, and it will be the suggested appropriations. It will talk about what's fixed capital outlay versus what's going to be from trust funds, what's going to do for the debt service that the state has. You'll have his letter to the legislature, and then you'll have like infographics and research on it from the governor's office for it. And that's usually my starting point when I do the CLE update in the summer. That's where my starting point is, to show the historical update on what the budget is, what it has been. Right now we're at 116 billion, which of course is a huge budget. So with that being said, we're going to go into the bills of interest that you may have heard a lot. And again, I don't know about you, but I don't have a political view. So again, I'm going to be as sterile as possible talking about these bills. And again, if you do feel strongly about them, contact your legislator for it. I'm also really proud because I figured out how to incorporate GIFs into my presentation. So this is me. If you ask a political question, I'll like slowly zoom out of view. I like it better when it shows it and it's like it's a Gator fin, and then they come out and they're wearing a UCF jersey a couple of years ago. That was pretty good. I as a UCF alum, I felt that in my heart. So this is an interesting topic. You've probably heard a lot about this. In fact, we may have several people here. Your offices may be involved with this. So that's why we'll be very sterile, very technical, and just do a 30,000-foot view of what's going on. There's a question about social media and minors. And when you look at the technicality of how these programs work in terms of their endless scrolling, where you can scroll forever until TikTok says, hey, you doing okay? But Instagram Reels, you can go on forever. Facebook, the algorithm, you can keep scrolling to see what's going on. It may be from last week instead of, yesterday, but it'll be that you can essentially lose yourself in just digesting digital information. When this bill was filed, this bill was passed, and what it provided for is that you needed to verify the age of the person who was opening the account. You had to prohibit minors from under 16 to create a new account. And then it also put on the commercial entity that basically provides the app that if they have anything that they knowingly know is intentionally published harmful material on that website, that they had to prohibit that access to people who are under 18 years of age. They had to have additional verification methods. And then the Department of Legal Affairs had the authority to basically investigate to see what was going on with those things. And then in addition to that, there was additional information about how it would all operate. Now, this would have a sunset provision. It would have been in 2029. And just as a sunset provision, generally speaking, they're put into some bills, and what they essentially do is they say in X amount of years, this legislation will sunset, which means it will no longer be enforced. The sunset position would have been October 2nd, 2029. This was vetoed on March 1st. When it was vetoed, the governor's letter for the veto basically said, I'm vetoing this. Let's see if we can come up with something better. So that's where you see at the bottom, and we'll go on to it next. It's going to be House Bill 3, which is online protection for minors. This is the one that you may have been hearing about in the news lately that's going to, in effect, on January 1st, 2025. So what this would do, this narrows the application from what we talked about. The new measure would only affect those platforms that use algorithms to present constant content to them. It would have, if you had 10% of users, if 10% of your users are under 16, who spend at least 2 hours a day on the platform, or they have addictive features like live stream and stuff. And to give the public policy background on this, in 2023, it's estimated that 4.9 billion with a B, and that's not too far from the actual total billion of people are on the planet, use social media, and that they're and this is the content that I'm reading from one of the staff analysis, which are super helpful. Experts have tied the use of increased social media to increased rates of anxiety, depression. You may have seen in some of your scrolling even that, there are these issues on whether there's actual a connection, kind of approximate cause, but for the social media, what X, Y, and Z have happened for it. So what this does is that this is going to lower that age from 16 to 14. You cannot have it if you're under 14. 14 to 15. They cannot enter into a contract and to be an account holder, basically, unless there's parental consent. And it also requires that all your personal data needs to be deleted when requested, unless there's a legal reason why they have it. And then it also puts that mens rea requirement that a commercial entity that knowingly and intentionally publishes or distributes material harmful to minors on a website. It's that knowingly and willfully, intentionally, that's going to be put on the social media companies for it. It also presents an actionable claim under FDUPTA, or the Florida Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act, and by the Department of Legal Affairs for it. So that's what's approved by the governor, that was signed by the governor. It was signed into law, became laws of Florida on the 25th in March with an effective date of January. And then what we see here is that this is going to be a related bill concerning the public records. We are operating in the sunshine, and this addresses the public records and the investigations by the Department of Legal Affairs for these sorts of investigations. Again, that will go into effect on January 1st as well. If you're interested about the codes, about the rules, if you go in and you put in social media here, we have for the definitions, the associated rules, because what you'll see in legislation is that, the department that's responsible for this statute, XYZ, is empowered to basically make the requisite rules for it. These are the rules that are coming based on this legislation for it. So that's from FAR that you can see what's going on. And I'll tell you, when I did this presentation as an update in June, there were far fewer rules. So you can see how hard our friends have been working on this. So to our friends who are working in the rules world and agency, bravo. It's, government lawyer life. So, but I think I've seen this film before, and I don't know if I like the ending. So let's talk about it. Oh, that's right. What we have is we also still have the social media platforms bill that we had from 2021. And this was the one that went after basically users for shadow banning, if they have a censorship issue, things like that. And this was so specifically aimed at kind of your three big SMPs or social media platforms for it. So we're seeing a lot of issues or legislation that are coming from social media in the wild, wild west, that is the internet in this present day and age, and not the internet as it was when I was on AIM as I think I was Styx girl, because I was like really skinny, but it was STYX, so everybody thought I was into Styx, which they're a great band, but AIM was crazy. And if you remember AIM, then you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And that how this is just a completely different creature than what we grew up with when we were still hanging, causing people to lose internet connection when, my mom would pick up the phone and there it goes. These two bills, these two issues are right now, we know that there's litigation going on for it. As for the House Bill 3, I just want to let you know that this bill right now, there's a lawsuit that's been filed on First Amendment grounds. It's been filed in the Northern District of Florida in the Tallahassee Division. It's seeking both injunctive and declaratory relief. And what they're saying is that this is, a First Amendment violation. What we have with this bill's already been up to the Florida Supreme Court. So on July 1st, SCOTUS remanded it back to vacated the 11th Circuit's decision and remanded it back. And what they said is that what their discussion is that, look, we didn't conduct the proper analysis, and so a different analysis needs to be done for it. And I had a screenshot of the opinion that did not make it into this presentation, but essentially it's please do 1 and then please do 2, and then let us know where you end up with this question about First Amendment and people's freedom of speech and how it's going to operate in the future. And I go back to the federal language all the time. I know T Swift goes back to December. I go back to the federal language because here's the deal. We have a lot of inherent tensions that are going on, and to my friends who are involved with this, I know that you know that I know that you know. Wow, is about all we're going to be able to say, because look, there's still that question about at the federal level, how are internet companies regulated, like telephone services? We have tension between the 10th Amendment and what the states are allowed to do, the First Amendment, and then we also don't know what's going to happen with future SCOTUS decisions. So we end up being, it's always sunny in, legislation in this area, just like it is in Philadelphia, just because there's so many pieces in flux. And to recall that the case that just went to the Supreme Court and came back on 7072, it wasn't just us, it was also Texas that has a law that's similarly situated as where it's being kicked back for it. So now we have the 11th and I believe the 5th Circuit. But the moral of the story is that as much as the states are doing something, there will need to be a discussion at the federal level, of course, and with the advent of AI and everything, it's really a confusing time to be able to figure out what's going to be the precedent for the future for it. So moving on, some other bills that were filed. This was the school chaplains. So this would allow district and charter schools to allow school chaplains. There were requirements put into it, such as they had to have some sort of degree or certification in counseling. They had to have a certain requirement as a religious or spiritual guide. So there's been discussions on whether this is unconstitutional because of the requirements, on whether it doesn't allow certain smaller religion or deeply held, sincerely held beliefs from being present. There are 2 school boards that have currently voted to not have this, and that's Osceola and Marion County. Their respective school boards voted to not adopt this. So those are the 2 school boards that I've been able to find from a official government policy in response to the school chaplains for it. Educator preparation programs. What this is going to do is that this is prohibit certain teacher preparation and professional learning certifications, school leader preparation programs that cannot violate the Florida Educational Equity Act, which passed a few years ago, in terms of what can be discussed in terms on theories of systemic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege are inherent in the institutions of the United States, those sort of concepts for it. And that those concepts were created to maintain social, political, and economic inequities. So those things are not permitted topics to talk about for it, and that comes from, I believe it was 2021 when we had the Florida Educational Equity Act. Again, the language that I'm quoting is from the staff analysis for this bill as what they have for it. So there is that's going to be something that's coming down from the Department of Education in terms of reviewing these programs for educators. The next one is the protection of children in crimes. This was basically requiring our guardian ad litem office and circuit to participate in the development of a state plan, and requires that for a GAL to be appointed throughout the entire dependency proceeding, including the appeals. And that the GAL can represent the child outside of it to ensure services and benefits for it. This would require the guardian ad litem's office to update their training unilaterally and regularly for it. They'd have to develop the attorney ad litem to recruit and mentor AALs, as they're called, assist the chief judges who maintain the AAL registries, and then help the dependent children find, at least one supportive adult. It also established the Fostering Prosperity Grant Program, which was subject to legislative appropriation. That's always the caveat, is if it's subject to legislative appropriation, to help youth transition from foster care to independent living. And it requires increased GAL involvement to make sure that youth that's transferring from foster care to independent living has a connection to a secure adult, basically an adult that they can go to for it. It also requires that when there's a domestic violence case, the bill will require that law enforcement who investigates the alleged incident of domestic violence, they need to administer a lethality, I'm pronouncing it wrong, I had it in my head, assessment, and record the score on the victim impact. And if they if the victim is unable to participate in that, they need to be referred to the nearest domestic violence center for it. This also provides for the FDLE to make the requisite rules, as well as providing for training for it, and that it needs to be done by January 1st, 2025. And so there's additional requirements that will be coming from that. Again, this is a bill that went into the effective date was July 1st, but the deadlines are for the respective agencies, for example, with rules, trainings, or whatever, have been come to January 1st. Employment regulations. This is going to be one when we talk about home rule and whatnot, and the preemption. This is an example of preemption. There's two things for this. You cannot, a local government is not able to sit there and impose heat exposure requirement safety obligations for it. You may have heard about this in the news. Other states have basically, OSHA is very general about what heat safety requirements are in terms of how many drinks per hour, et cetera, et cetera. I have to take this off because it's bugging me. So what we have is, this is saying if it's going to be something that we're going to offer, it's going to be from Tallahassee. It's not going to be a local agency or a local municipality that's going to have it on there for it. So again, this is a question of the home rule. And we've seen a lot of these kind of preemption bills come through in the last couple of years. And again, there's that question about how does home rule work and the like in the state of Florida. You heard a lot about this. This is going to be the employment for youths, your 16 and 17-year-olds. This is what your new chart looks like for minors who are 16 and 17 and 14 and 15. So bravo to our friends at DBPR for putting this together. I always like to recognize that, the good work that our departments do and making sure that when the legislature says this is what's going to happen, that we're making sure the inputs see. So here's your new chart for the child labor laws. If we have any of our friends who are county and city attorneys, you are now exempt from public records. So just so you know, this is not unlike other ones that have for regional conflict counsel, PD, state attorneys, county and city attorneys, judges, etc. So you are now on there. So make sure if that's something you want, make sure it's applied to you. Unauthorized public camping. Gainesville's voted on an ordinance for this. Gainesville voted on one. Escambia's voted on one. Melbourne is considering one. So the municipalities are really looking at trying to effectuate. This bill just went into effect in October. And so the bill, this is essentially what has been prevented individuals from camping on like sidewalks, setting up tents, those sort of issues. And so this is undergoing a lot of change right now, especially for our friends who are city, county, and local governments. But Escambia and Gainesville were two of the ones that have ordinances that are percolating, going through their process. And then there was one that Melbourne, Florida, which is my hometown, yay, Brevard, is considering one. And this is based on the language that's in this statute now, in this laws of Florida. And as you can see, it provides that DCF now has the authority to inspect the property, issue notices, things like that. So this is, again, a statute where this is the statute going to the executive branch and the agency within the executive branch saying, okay, this is what we're going to need you to do for that. So that's not correct. Oh, there we go. I clicked the wrong thing. You would think that I would know what I'm doing after all this time. Property rights. Again, this is going to be when you have somebody who's in your house who's not supposed to be there, and they've essentially kind of established some sort of pseudo property right to remain in the property. This is the process that was established by the legislature to allow an expedited removal of those persons for it. The other aspect that's been interesting is you may have heard in the news about people who will go through, they'll see a property that's for rent, they'll go through, they'll pay an amount to do a background check or whatever, and it turns out the property is totally owned by someone. Those are now going to be felonies. So unlawfully detaining or trespassing upon a residential dwelling and causing $1,000 in damage is now going to be a second-degree felony. Using a false document purporting to be a valid lease or deed is now a first-degree misdemeanor. And if you fraudulently list the property for sale, it's a first-degree felony. So, FYI. If you are in an HOA this is a big one, and this is interesting because last session there was a lot of focus on the condo, especially on condos, but there's also a lot with HOAs, and one of those is going to be the fact that if you live in an HOA, you're very familiar with your architectural review committees and the guidelines for it. And the question was, is how are hurricane things going to work? Because shutters are not. I use the very, very demure, very mindful motif of plywood. And so that really doesn't jive with what my HOA thinks. So this is, but I only have it up temporarily. It's not a permanent structure. This is one of those things that the legislature passed in terms of the HOA power versus this public policy need of people need to be able to protect their property, even if it's not always, you know, the aesthetic. So for my criminal law friends, this provision is actually under 907041, and it's under the subsection for the capital or first degree felony punishable by life or presumption great or proof evident presumption 8 that it can be based solely on hearsay for it. So I thought that was interesting because I get habeas corpus petitions at the appellate court, and when we get the proof, when we get the capital felonies, for example, where it's been charged, this is interesting, and this is one of those areas. What's interesting is that this section right now is in flux, but it's due to other issues in the statute. It actually doesn't have to do with the hearsay. I haven't been able to find the section's been challenged even as of like a couple of months ago. One of the DCA said, hey, look at these issues. There are major issues with the statute, but this one in particular with the solely has not been raised yet. Advanced technology. So there's going to be a government modernization committee. We'll see how that plays out. Why it keeps doing that, I don't know. But clearly I love I love the Department of Legal Affairs too. So let's talk about the amendments. 2 of them passed. That's going to be the right to hunt and fish, and that's going to be your certain adjustments to the homestead adjustments. The other ones, such as the repeal of the public campaign financing requirement, partisan school board, use of marijuana, abortion, those did not pass, but we'll come back to those in a little bit for it. These were some of the other bills that were of interest that were passed, and that's going to be things like the alternate DCA headquarters. There's going to be an update to the safe exchange of minors, for especially when it comes to domestic violence situation. For pregnant persons, there's going to be an excuse postpartum of within 6 months of birth, so you're not, you know, 3 months out and from postpartum and you're having to go sit in jury trial. It's now going to be 6 months. The surrendered infants or the angel drop-offs, those are now from 7 days up to 30 days. Here's an interesting one. The release of balloons. It makes releasing a balloon littering, except with exceptions for people under 6 years old. So keep that in mind next time you're at a party. Don't let the balloons go. All right, so let's turn to the 127th legislative session. First, let's do the numbers. We've had 11 claim bills filed, and actually, just kidding, it's not 101. Like I said, I can't do math. It's actually been 83 bills that have been filed. I checked this morning and I did the math. It was 50. It was, no. Yes. Yes. No. We went up to 50. Yes, because we had 106 bills, but they're evenly numbered. So you divide that by 2, and then there were 83 in the House, and then you kind of divide that by 2 and go from there for it. So I think it's 83. I think it's 83. But we do have claim bills that were filed. So let's welcome to the new leadership. So right now, as I said in the beginning, we had Speaker Renner, and now we have Speaker Perez. He is from Miami. You can see that there's representation from North, South, Hills, West Coast, and East Coast for it. Senator Jim Boyd is not from Merritt Island. I'm sorry that that's in there. These are not correct. This did not. Did that correct? My thing is doing really weird because I know I saved it and I saved a screenshot. So somehow I have, it's probably my kids' elves. I'm going to just blame that. My kids' elves were messing with us last night. I am pretty positive. The moral of the story is that when you're in the legislature, you are going to have your speaker and your speaker of the House. They're going to be the ones that are going to set up the Ways and Means Committee. Basically the committees that determine where bills are going to go, if bills are heard, those sort of things. But then you have your majority and minority leader. You have your respective offices for it. And if you go to the Florida House or the Florida Senate website, what you'll find is you'll see House Majority, House Minority, and you'll be able to see those from the respective parties about the legislation and their efforts that they're working on for it. So this is a really not great format, but bear with me. What you're going to see is if you look on the left side, that was the committee structure under Speaker Renner, and then on the right side is the committee structure under Speaker Perez. The reason I have these next to each other is that Speaker Perez, in his during the organizational session, which took place about a month ago in Tallahassee, Speaker Perez made a point to note that his committee structure, because the speakers are empowered to set up the committee structure, is going to be leaner, and that they wanted to be able to have less subcommittees and allow more substantial committees, and it'll make the substantial committees kind of like work closely together. But of course, you also have your substantive policy area committees, and then you also have your financial or the fiscal related, the appropriations committees for it. So you can see that there is a difference in terms of that structure for it. Lobbyist planes can be used, but what the caveat is that one, you have to disclose it, and two, you have to pay the prorated fare of coach fare for it. And then there's also going to be updated lobbyist disclosures, including for former members who are now registered as lobbyists, and how that's going to work, like if they're registered for a principal but not as a lobbyist. And that was brought up due to the fact that they, if you are a member or a former member, you may go into the chamber when it's in session. Like I, as a legislative staffer, I had to go to the sergeant at arms and say, hey, can you pull out my boss, XYZ, whereas former members are able to go in there, but they're not allowed to if they're lobbyists. So there's now clarification on former members based on who they're working for and what they're doing at that time. There's also requirements about information, how it's provided to the staffers and whatnot. So if you are in this capacity at all, I would strongly urge you to go to look up the lobbyist information, Online Sunshine, of course, online to say the fl.gov, definitely where you want to go check out that information and if it applies to you. So we're up here right now. We're up here. You are here. We're not even in January yet. We are in the holidays, D-A-Z-E. In 2 weeks, I will be confused, full of cheese, and unsure what day it is. But for right now, we are here. The interim committees, so there were interim committee meetings that were last week and the week before. One was for the House, one was for the Senate. Now they're adjourned through January. This is when it's going to get really exciting, because this is when we're going to start to see a lot of work on the bills for it. January 24th. Is going to be the member bill submission deadline. Remember, we talked about the importance of bill drafting and having it in on time. Yeah, you have to have it in. It has to be click submit by 5 p.m. for that. Now, I always remember generally when that submission bill deadline operates, when session begins in March, because many, many moons ago, I eloped on the member bill submission deadline, on the bill drafting. I eloped that day, not thinking. I worked for the legislature, not thinking. We're about to cut our little cake, and bill drafting calls, and it's 4:50 p.m. If you think that I answered that call and I said, hold up, everybody, hold up, I need to answer this call. Yes. So 14 years ago, my legislation lasted longer. So the moral of the story is that's how I always remember it, but you always want to remember it, because if it's not in there, that's it. There's no going back. There's no moving to, set aside the judgment. It's 5 p.m. because bill drafting has a lot of work to do. So 5 p.m. Remember that. And then you'll see that we will have the sine die, and that's going to be in May. That's 60 days after session. If you haven't seen the sine die procedure, it's really, really cool to see the two sergeant at arms that come out and they drop their hankies in the middle to conclude the ending of session. It's really, really cool. I would highly suggest, if you're in Tallahassee especially, it's cool to see. Here are some of the bills that have been filed. Again, these are just the bills that are filed. I have no opinion on that. There's no personal opinion on it. So this is the display of flags by governmental entities. This has actually gotten a lot of news press lately. What this bill says is that governmental agencies, and it defines them, says that you can only do certain flags to show. You can only fly certain flags. Some of those including the state of Florida flag, the American flag, armed services. Other flags would not be permitted and therefore would not be allowed to be flown by the governmental entity in its kind of official capacity of the various flagpoles that they have for it. There's also a requirement of neutrality for certain agencies and certain positions for this. So this was filed 2 days ago. So it's just been filed. So it's not been referred to a committee. Nobody's looked at it. It's just been filed. And that means the original file version. If you're looking on the website, you'll see original version. This is what you'll have, the original version. And then later, as the committees go through and as the committees meet, you'll see that it'll be referred to XYZ committees. Right now, that's not happened yet, so that's why the status is filed. If it went into effect, if it made it into law, it would go into effect in July. Windstorm coverage, property insurance. We always talk about property insurance every year. Florida's insurance, for my friends who are citizens. I also want to tell you that if you ever want to hear a story about how we got rid of the tickle layer, the temporary increases in coverage layers, I have a really great chart I made on Paint in 2008 for that, 2009. If you're ever interested, that's like, I will make this very important graphic in Paint. So what this is going to do is that there's going to be an onus on citizens to essentially make lines of to make coverage available, to make insurance lines available. It provides the requirements for that type of windstorm coverage. It provides for the underwriting, the whole mechanism of providing the insurance for it. It also revises the requirements for the corporation's plan of operation, the statements that agents will make, things like that. So again, this has been filed. This has not been heard by a committee. This is just filed 12 days ago. So how it will go through, and I did make a point not to put who's filed it, because if you have familiarity with the members, then you would be able to see who's filing this, if you will, and there's a political aspect to that. So that's why I do not put the member who filed it. To keep the language right here is basically the little blurb language that if you go and put in House Bill 13 on the Florida House website, this an act relating to, this is the title of the act, and this is the brief synopsis that the legislature provides on its website for it. House Bill 19, there is a related bill for this, but there is no companion. And remember, in order to pass, you have to have identical language pass both chambers, not unlike our federal government, where of course you have to have that as well. But these would be the requirements for FTLE, would have a Haven created coordinating council. There would be submission of reports. You'll often see this when there are going to be the creation of things, that the agency or entity that's being created or overseeing the creation of a program is required to submit those reports to the governor's office, or they can be submitted to the legislature, or both. So you will see that, and so this is an example. It also provides for the funding of the coordinating council, and this is one of the nuances of understanding legislation. Is the fact is you always have to see how the funding is going to be. Is it going to be recurring? Is it non-recurring? Because if it's recurring, if it's basically said, look, the legislature intends for this to be funded so long as this program remains and the statute remains operational, that's one thing. And so that's something that every year when you have appropriations, it's going to be this list, and it's going to be like, okay, these are the things that we have to do, X, Y, Z. Or if you have a situation, for example, with our trust funds or whatever, there are programs that are tied to those trust funds that saying, okay, this is going to be the allocation from this trust fund for this program. And there's not necessarily the same impetus to say, hey, make sure that this is in there. I mean, of course, any lobbyist will tell you, you always want to make sure that funding's in there. Until the day it's enrolled, that there's that line in there that says funding, blah, 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 this is where it's going to come from in the appropriations bill. But that is the thing. This applies to claim bills, for example, because if your claim bill is written in such a way, there's a question on whether there has to be a future additional action by the legislature in its appropriations capacity to authorize the award. They can say, yes, we recognize it, but we're going to wait on this. So that's one of the important things, that when you're looking at legislation, especially when you're looking at something that's creating something that hasn't been there before or expanding, you want to read the legislation to see what the funding aspect is, and then you want to cross-reference it with the big appropriations bill, and that's going to be the PCB, or not the proposed committee budget, the PCBs. You want to look at that appropriations document for it. And then interestingly, if you want to go further down the rabbit hole, which is funny now because my daughter now has a rabbit, so now I can say that and say I have a rabbit hole. What you can say now is that you want to say, I want to look at what the proposed governor's budget was, because that also gives you additional information about what the executive branch thinks about XYZ programs or whatever for it. So those are the variety of ways that you can look to see the funding aspect. Because remember, at the end of the day, the legislature simply has to pass a balanced budget, that what it takes in is what it takes out, not a penny more for it. So that's one of the little tips and tricks that you may learn today about checking how the funding is presented for it. This is a big one. We're going to remove the provision that prohibits adult children and parents of adult children from recovering certain damages in medical negligence suits. No companion has been filed. It was just filed 12 days ago. That would go into effect in July 1, 2025. So that's been filed. It's a very simple bill. It's like literally very, it says section XYZ is hereby stricken, repealed. Carrying and possession of firearms. So you may have heard this about this. This is the carrying and possession of firearms. This would change our concealed firearm without license. This is kind of a going back and forth. Now you can conceal carry without a permit, and now so there is that debate. And what you'll see at this point in the legislature is you really do get to get a feel for what ideally people want the policies to be. But remember, there has to be, as you may have heard in Congress, how they'll talk about the horse trading of it. This is the bill in its original form before you'll see the committees and the amendments. But this one has been this has changed. So right now, there's very few places where you really can't have a gun. This bill would change that. For example, it would allow school districts to restrict the possession of firearm in a vehicle, for example. Of course, there are exceptions for the state for the protection of the right to keep and bear arms in your motor vehicles, things like that. Repeals protection provision for risk protection orders for it. So again, this has just been filed 9 days ago. How it will be presented, debated, any amendments is what's going to come in January. This is an interesting provision that you may have heard about in the news. So just to let you know, in 2018, after the tragedy at Stoneman Douglas High School, the legislature were very quick to pass what was called the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. In that act was subsection 13 of 790.0065. What that said is that you could not have, under 21, you could not be purchased or be transferred a firearm. This prohibition would delete that. So what the statute essentially says is that prohibition would be relieved for it. You've heard about this in the news because even the leaders of the respective chambers are talking about it. So there's news articles about it, about this topic. So even though it's a very short, simple bill, if you will, because it's just simply deleting one provision, this is one of those bills that you end up seeing as this is a notable bill for it because of the discussion it sparks, as well as the original act from 2018 is still facing litigation. You've had special interest groups, you've had law advocacy groups or whatever who raise constitutional challenges to these sorts of bills. So again, this is one of those areas where, coupled with this and the bill that I just discussed, there's always these issues that come up, but the notable ones you'll hear about more in the news for it. Turning to judicial sales, there's going to be the Transparency in Judicial Sales and Foreclosures Act. So what this is going to do is this is going to say this is how we're going to do judicial sales. It's going to prohibit the using bidding credits or certain other offsets and certain types of sales, and that if certain conditions arise, there is flexibility for the courts for it. So if judicial sales are something that you have a attachment to, or it's part of your practice, track the bill. You may want to see, again, that was filed a month ago. Nothing's been done with it. Did not see a companion or related bill, but it would go into effect in July for it. So this is kind of bringing it full circle back to our social media platforms and things like that. We know that cyber stalking, online harassment, we know that those are issues. We know that there are issues with threats to educational institutions. So what this is that this is going to propose revising those words such as harassment, coercive conduct, cyber stalking. It puts the mens rea of maliciously and willfully, but it's as to the judicial system, it's going to revise the elements of the offense, and it's going to say that there's going to be a warrant issued for the arrest of that defendant, under certain conditions for it. But again, what we're seeing is this evolution in the criminal law side of things of trying to catch up to where the technology is. some of you may recall, there was a question even with like online bullying and, instant messages between minors and the contents of those messages. So this is starting to be kind of a recurring thing where there's statutes trying to fill in the gaps. Because remember, the statutes of Florida, when they go silent, they defer to the common law as it existed in, I believe, 1776, 1774. But there's a provision that says, when in doubt, this is where the common law that was enforced. They were not, sending reels and DMs in that time period. So it is this question of trying to fill in those gaps in light of where the technology is taking us, not unlike what we were talking about just a few minutes ago with social media platforms and minors on social media for it. And if you have teenagers, then you know very well about the proliferation about this technology. I mean, just even on a superficial level, just the way that my son, and he has no social media, he's not allowed to have a social media profile in my house. I do not do that. But the Skibbity and the Rizzler, like, I don't even know how they get access to this, but the way that social media allows for that transference of just the colloquialisms that teenagers are using. So that's where we see these bills coming up in the criminal and civil context. Child welfare. So for anybody that is in this arena, you may want to look at this. This is the Child Safety and Custody Compliance Act. This is going to put additional records and investigation requirements for the CPTs that are employed by the Department of Children and Families. It's going to make sure that the records for parenting plans, etc., they have to be up to date. Prohibiting anonymous reports from being afforded the same presumption of good faith as reports by persons who identify themselves. So that is going to be a change. Again, this was just filed about a month ago. It has not been referred to anything. The movement on this will be next month. And that the schools are responsible for and required to enforce and adhere to the parenting plan for custody arrangements for it. So now there's going to be that actual overt imposition of a requirement on schools. Again, if you were to look at this now and you look at it, you would just see just the statute as you would not see the staff analysis, what the research, you're just going to see the plain bill. But if this is an area that can affect your practice, this is going to be something that you're going to want to go to the Florida House or Florida Senate website. You're going to want to track the bill and get the updates and see when it's going before committee, see what the testimony is of those committees, because those committee meetings are where you're going to see stakeholders in these bills. You'll have people from the agencies who stand up before the committee. You'll see the lobbyists, advocacy groups. You'll see people of the public. They will get up and say, this language works. This language does not work. This is that deliberative process that you'll see for it. This is an interesting one that I was surprised to see, not surprised to see, but this is a concept. So, hey, Smexma, remind me next month to sign up for the government lawyer section outstanding CLE program. And then she'll say, I can't do that for you, Hal. But the gist of that is that electronic monitoring is available. We have surveillance. We do it for babies. We do it for infants. We have it in schools, grocery stores. I just read a report that Walmart may actually start having some of their employees wear body cameras, which I thought was very interesting. But the moral of the story is that how does that work if a loved one says, look, I live out of state and I want to be able to have Smexa right here next to my loved one's bed so I can drop in and say, how is that going to work? So this is an attempt to do that. That was filed on the 22nd, not on the 122nd. Again, blame the elves. There's 8 of them in my house. Don't know where they keep coming from, but they're there. But what you'll see here is that, again, this is one of those areas, like I just said, the technology's here, the policies and the statutes are here. How do we bridge that divide while also maintaining things like privacy, for example? If you have surveillance in your loved one's room, what if they share a room? What about the medical personnel that come in? What about if they're doing X, Y, and Z? So this bill is the start of that conversation, if you will. Recreational customary use in beasts. This is going to repeal this entire statute. So if you're a city, county, local government, you may want to keep track of this bill. But wait, there's more exciting legislative information. I have 5 minutes. I promise I will make this worth your time. So let's do the prophecy. This is where I'd offer my predictions if I had any. I don't have any. I can tell you that we already have very active 2026 state constitutional ballot initiatives. These are the ones that are going to be through the initiative process, which is where they come to you outside of like PetSmart or whatever. I'm like, hey, do you want to sign this thing for it? This is not unlike a couple of years ago with the online gambling, for example. You may have seen it this year or the last couple of years for the ballot initiatives that we have, which were the medical decisions and the two medical decision related ballot initiatives for it. So these are some of the ones which is going to be putting the prayer back in school, minimum wage of $10, reintegration process, reorganize the cabinet, modify. So these are just citizen-led petition initiatives for it that have at least started the process to get onto the ballot. Hot topic. So there have been a lot of discussion about how the legislature is going to respond to the constitutional amendments. And the reason being is that how close they were to passing, they felt just short of that 60% threshold. Is not a simple majority. It is a 60% threshold. So there's been a lot of speculation about how that's going to play into it. The Florida Bar has requested 50 new judgeships for it. So that's going to be in your area. Look out for new judgeships with your JNC. One of the property insurance, I did not cover this, but we do have a lot going on with condo litigation. In fact, Governor DeSantis had specifically asked the legislature convene for a special session this past fall, to address the condo litigation following the Surfside tragedy. The legislature did not do that. For immediate past president of the Senate, Pasadomo, wrote a letter saying, look, we're going to just look at these issues. I'm sure will be looked at in the next regular session for it. But there is a lot going on with the condos. And actually, I just saw a discussion in one of the many insurance. I like insurance looks. That's the committees my members were in. So still really into insurance. I'm great at parties. What was being talked about was the fact of those reforms for condos. And also as well, there have been reforms for HOAs as well, and how that's impacted the property insurance market that we have in Florida. Because remember, Florida is one of, if not the worst place to do insurance. We have a lot of perils. It's so parallel. It's the Castle Anthrax. It's there's so much peril. And so that was the thing, is that it's the peril. And what about that means is that every year this is something that's going to be discussed. There's also a question on surpluses and deficits. So the Florida Tax Watch, even the long-term economic planning entity of the Florida government, they're saying, hey, in a couple of years, we may need to have a different conversation. And of course, healthcare and education, I just saw a report that ACA is looking to work to get a grant to basically shore up the medical workforce, because we do have a disparity between how fast we're growing and to have the necessary medical professionals to meet a standard of care for it. And that's why over the last couple of years, you've seen things about allowing who can allow to give immunizations and stuff like that. So here's the deal. Every time I have the same CLE from the movie Airplane, am I going to use it or draw 25? I will draw 25. Shirley, you can't be finished. Yes, I am finished. Don't call me Shirley. But let's be honest, I'm ending the CLE, but I really hope that if anybody ever wants to have the update, I'm always available. Or if you want to talk about legislative research or claim bills. And I hope for those of you who are Swifties like myself, yes, it is Jake Gyllenhaal. That is Red Scarf Man. But with that being said, the more you know. Thank you so much for your time. I hope, if anything, that I've made you laugh a little bit while you're spending your lunch hour on the CLE. And I appreciate you very much being part of our government lawyer section. As chair-elect, let me just say, I know that it is a sacrifice to say, hey, I'm going to spend that extra money to join our section. Thank you for doing it. Anything that we can do to make your experience better, to support you as a government attorney, please do not hesitate to contact us. We are here working for you. I know I speak on behalf of our chair, the awesome John Badger, that when it comes to whatever we can do, we are all ears. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it back over to our outstanding program administrator, Carly.
Thank you, Maria. That was excellent. We've recorded this program, so I will be sending this out to all of the registrants in case there's any follow-up that needs to happen, or you can reach out to me or Maria directly. And that answers your question, Eric. All right, I think we're good to go. Everybody have happy holidays, and we'll see you
One
next
more
year.
thing. If you
Oh,
want
yeah.
to use me, I am McCorkle, McCorklem, McCorkle M, so Maria McCorkle M, at flcourts.gov. And if you do have specific questions, or if for some reason there's something that you need to know about the legislative research work, I really love this stuff. So whatever I can do to help, just shoot me an email. I would love to help. And like Carly said, thank you for being here. And now I won't interrupt you again, Carly. I'm sorry. Carly's awesome.
You're all good. Thanks, Maria. And just as a reminder, the course number is 8815. Thank you.